It's interesting. First of all, what is your cephalic index? Your cephalic index is essentially a measurement of the length of your skull versus the width of your skull. So this is the view of a skull top down. Okay, you can see here. The length will be measured from the front of the forehead to the back of the head, and the width will obviously be measured from the widest point of the skull from top view. Okay, and that will give you a cephalic index. So what you essentially do is you divide so you do the width divided by the length, and that will give you the cephalic index essentially. Okay, it's a very simple calculation. Now there are three types of skulls, so I want you to kind of stay with me on this, yeah? Dolichocephalic, which is a long skull. So when you have a long skull, basically we're talking about the length to width ratio is that it ends up being quite a narrow skull. So you can see here on this example here, we have quite a narrow skull. We then have mesocephalic or mesoticephalic. Now this is kind of a new classification because before you only really had dolichocephalic and brachycephalic, but they've introduced mesoticephalic more recently, and that's kind of like an in-betweeny kind of skull, where it's kind of like, you know, neither long nor round, so to speak, or square. It's kind of like sitting in between. And then you have the more square-shaped skull over here, which is the brachycephalic or the round skull, they call it, where you can see the length by the width. There's not a huge amount of difference between the length and the width, and that gives you more of your kind of roundish shaped skull from the top, or at least square. You can see from the back it's quite flat. Now, where does this get interesting? Well, when it comes to the
Now, look at Hawass. He mentions Yuya as dolichocephalic. He mentions Tutmos II as dolichocephalic. And he also mentions the other individual as Tutmos I, which they no longer say he's Tutmos I, as also dolichocephalic. But I guess he didn't want Akhenaten and Tutankhamen to be dolichocephalic. I don't know why. It doesn't make no sense. Everyone else is dolichocephalic. But let's look at Tutankhamen. The index is 83.9. Ironically, when the King's Monologue does his computations, it just comes out 83.83, a similar percentage, using the same skull that I showed.
Cephalic index, it has to be taken directly from the top. If it's taken slightly from the rear or slightly from the front, i.e. angled, if the camera isn't pointing straight down, then you're not going to get a correct reading of the cephalic index. You're going to get exaggeration. Now, the problem with this image, once again, I will prove again, is that this image was not taken as a cephalometric image, i.e. it wasn't taken to gain precise measurements. I want you guys now to have a look at the image, and I'm going to ask you the question as the community. What do you think the purpose of this image was based on what you can see? What do you think the purpose of this image was? I'm going to open up the question to the community. I want to see if any of you guys can get that. Because if this image wasn't to get the cephalic index of King Tutankhamun, why did they take this photo? Have a look at it, and someone tell me why you think this photo was taken. Thank you. You got it straight away. It wasn't that hard. Okay? Straight away. JD, you're quickest of the mark. Okay? And it says to show the head adornment. Okay? You can see that King Tut is wearing a very elaborate crown. And the only purpose, the only reason this image was taken was to show the detailing on the crown, to look at the design, to take a picture of the headdress, like you guys are all saying in the chats. I'm literally reading what you've written there. It's not rocket science. This image was taken to show as much of the crown as possible. So there are two things that would have taken place with this image. Firstly, the image would have been taken probably with a wide angle lens to show as much of the detailing as possible. And secondly, this image would have been taken from an angle to show as much of the detail as possible. There was no concern as to whether or not we're taking this image directly down from the top. The only purpose of this image was to show the detailing of the crown. And I'm just going to quickly show that to you, prove that to you, by showing you the raw. Okay, let me just quickly pull this up on the screen. And I'm just going to quickly share my screen with you guys so we can make sure that I'm not making this up. You'll see here, this is the actual magazine that this image was printed in when they found the skull cap, and you can see it says the skull cap on the mummy's head. Not that you needed to see that written out, but even the caption supports the fact that this is an image trying to show you King Tut and Akhenat's skull cap. It's not a cephalometric image, i.e. it wasn't taken with the intention of taking cephalic indices of the skull. Now, to be clear, just because I like to be quite thorough in what I do, I did take a cephalic index. So I've even done a favor for EPU or Epubliurus, whatever his name is over here, and I've actually done the work that he didn't bother to do, and I've taken the cephalic index. So I'm just going to quickly share another screen. I hope this doesn't crash my computer. Okay, we're on, and double click. Okay, we're in. We are in. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to quickly scroll down. So I did a cephalic index of this image. Let me zoom out. And the cephalic index of this image is actually 83%. Okay? So the cephalic index is actually 83%. So that would make it a brachycephalic skull if this was a cephalometric image, which it's not. Now,
so I'm going to give the King's Monologue credit here. The image, if you actually read it, like how he read it, it said that the image was taken, the purpose of the image was taken to show the cap. Okay, that was the purpose of the image. All right. Now, it's funny how that Hawas's measurements is 83%, but then when you take a cephalic index of the image that I have, it also shows around 83%. Now, we're going to come back to this. If we look at the way that he's saying that the image of the skull was taken, it will be completely wrong. And it's very simple to understand why. Because if you look at the skull cap, has a snake-like figure on the back, and it goes from the top all the way down. If the picture was taken from this angle, you would have seen the entire length of the tail of the snake that's on top of the head. So it was not taken from this angle. But let's play his game. Let's play his game. Because either way, we could still see that the back of the head is flat if this was the way the image was taken. But the reality is this is not the angle that the image was taken, because if that was the case, you would have saw the tail of the snake. Now I'm going to show you another image that was right in front of him that is top down. Okay, community, can you tell me, community, what is the purpose of this skull, community? I can't even do your accent really good. I'm sorry, man, my bad. Anyways, what is the purpose of this image now? Let's use your logic. What is the purpose of this image? Is the purpose of this image to show the top of Akhenaten's skull? Or his crown? Or is it just, what is the purpose of this image? Oh, wait a minute. Let's read at the bottom. Come on, community. Vertex of skull from tomb 55 compared with that of skull of Tutankhamun. So here's the first obvious problem that anybody can see who does work with graphs or math. You're using different diameters to measure. As can be seen on the top with the left skull of Tut and Akhenaten, the diameter of the measurements is smaller, whereas in the ones with King Tut on the right and Akhenaten on the bottom, the diameter of measurement is already large. Now, if people don't understand what that means, that's basically meaning the difference between measuring with a ruler, the width of a ruler, versus measuring using the width of a string. So it's clearly obvious this is the first disconnect. This makes no sense. You're using multiple measurement angles. Okay, so as you can see, the one on the right, you can see what I was talking about, the different diameters. You can see small lines and you can see big wide lines. Those differences can make a big difference in measurements. But that's not the only problem. The other problem is, as you can see in the image on the right, on the left, you can see that you're using any angle or any part of the skull to measure from. It doesn't go like that. You can't just pick any part of the skull and just point to there and that's it. This is why you need to leave this to radiologists and the scientists, because you're picking any part of the skull. You can't just do that. There's certain parts of the skull where they're going to start the measurements from. So I want to show you distortion in some of the things that he does. So take a look at, for example, the head on the left, where I pointed at the yellow, where you see the yellow arrow. You'll notice that's lined up near the forehead. It's not near the nose. It's right near the forehead, near in between the eyes. That's where you're technically supposed to take the measurements for the cephalic index. Okay, so let's see what he does with this. In using the same scenario, notice where he puts the line, the outside lines. Look at number 1. It's at the tip of his nose. It should have been where you see number 2 is at, near the forehead, just like he did in the first demonstration. So clearly, this alone just kills almost this entire part of his video, because he didn't even do this accurately. Okay, and just to add, for the images on the left, you can't even use that as comparison, because the bottom image is not the same as the top image. The bottom image is actually with King Tut's head, where he has the brass band on and a covering on top of his head that was covering the snake that we see at the top. So the width and measurements, you can't even use that, the bottom one, to compare to the top one, because it's two totally different images. One of King Tut's argument is that in order for it to be a top-down view, you need to be able to see the forehead. And because we're not seeing the forehead in this image, then it's not a top-down view. But maybe the King's Monologue is not seeing things properly, because I see a forehead there. Yeah, just to remind you, you did say that the picture or the angle that of King Tut's head was taken was at this angle. Just a reminder, you also said that a brachycephalic skull, the back of the head is flat. Make it make sense. Number one, the image number one is what the King's Monologue said Hawass did in order to get that 83 cephalic index. Now, I'm trying to figure this out. Hawass turned the image to this angle in order to get to 83. Now, why would he have to do that if, according to you, I was able to get to 80, you was able to get a cephalic index at 83 from this angle, from the top above? All Hawass would have had to have done was, in the x-rays, is take an angle from this angle, according to you, if this is the angle that got 83. So now you have two angles that got you a cephalic index of 83. That's the catcher. You have two angles to get a cephalic index of 83. Make it make sense. So this is King Tut looking straight ahead. I'm assuming it would make common sense that this will be a perfect angle to do the cephalic index. You know, you need to have it straight ahead, his face looking straight ahead. So my question is this: why, when you got this angle of this cephalic index of 73, did you keep him looking down still? I would figure since you did angle it a little bit, why don't you just angle it more so that it fits with the original image of King Tut looking straight ahead? Clearly, King Tut here is not looking straight ahead. Maybe you should do that and then remeasure it and see what you get.
And the reason I'm showing you this is a book that was drafted by Zahi Hawass, okay? And in this book, you will get literally images of the, let me just quickly hide this comment. Thank you very much, by the way, Surfactant, for your $5. I appreciate you. In this book, you'll get images and scans that you have never seen before. And I thought, you think you've seen them all on the net and you haven't. This book is literally full of them, every angle that you can think of. And I said it in a short before, but I'm going to say it again. When I found this book, I figured out how Zahi Hawass had King Tutankhamun's cephalic index at 83%, I think he has it at. Okay? It's ridiculously out of whack. But it's like 83%, which is like 10% off. Obviously, you can see the measurements that I got, which is around 75%. Now I'm going to show you how Zahi Hawass got there, so we're all very clear. Okay, so let me quickly scroll over and show you this image. You can see my black hand there. Show you this image. Now, someone tell me, first glance, what's wrong with this image? This is a section scan of King Tutankhamun's skull, or at least maybe not what's wrong with it. What stands out about this image? Hi Tracy, don't worry about it. Someone tell me. You're looking at this image now, what stands out to you about the way this image has been taken? Thank you, Talia. Boom, very quick off the mark. Skull tilted forward. Any idiot can see that the skull is tilted forward. Okay? The peanut head is natural. We expect that, Bantu beauties. But you guys can see, Know Thyself says angled. BR says head tilted forward. And I noticed this instantly. And the other thing I noticed is that I thought, okay, maybe he's just done it so it fits in the square. I think maybe he was like starved for space in the book and he's tilted it forward so it kind of fits in the square. And I thought that was the case until I found another image of Tutankhamun and it was at the same angle. And I found another image of Tutankhamun. Whoops, this one's upside down. Can I rotate? Yeah, that's it. And it was at the same angle. And then I realized, Zahi Hawass is on something here. Why is he looking down? That's what everyone with a logical mind would say. Why is he looking down? Because in Zahi Hawas's world, Tutankhamun is not looking down. What you'll notice is if you tilt the skull downward, like you can see, he's taken all of these images in this book, and it's not an accident. What he's trying to do, he's trying to present the idea that the back of Tutankhamun's skull over here, this is the top of his skull. Okay? And he's trying to present the idea that the top of his forehead here is the front of his forehead. And he does this with every single image of Tutankhamun. It's absolutely ridiculous. Now, here's the kicker. The irony is, even the reconstructions that Zahi Hawass sanctioned did not go with this nonsense. So I'm going to show you this image. So here's Zahi Hawass, how he thinks Tutankhamun's skull should be rendered. And here's a reconstruction that he sanctioned. You'll notice the reconstruction that sits behind has his skull flat, like it should be. Both of the other reconstructions that he sanctioned below also have it flat. Even the god-awful reconstruction, let me just pull this one up on the screen. Even this god-awful reconstruction understood that King Tutankhamun's head is flat at the top and pokes out at the back. Every single reconstruction he sanctioned understood this. But Zahi Hawass, oh no, not Zahi Hawass. He thinks King Tutankhamun's skull, this is the correct orientation. Because King Tutankhamun is, what the hell is that? What kind of chin is that? This is a disgusting manipulation of data. And the thing about
make it make sense. If Hawass' purpose was to present the idea that the back of the skull was the top, like what you was pointing out, then why would his own sanctioned reconstructions conflict with that? Unless he was not presenting that idea and that was just you. In this image that he points at, the first thing I see is an arrow in the head. So what is this purpose of this image for then? Well, if you go on further, you'll see that the purpose of the image was to show that there was a bony fragment in the back of Tutankhamen's head, which is shown at a slight angle. In this image, the arrow is pointed at something. And of course, again, if you read it, it's basically to show that he had a wisdom tooth that hadn't erupted. So here's the first image that you saw, and you thought that Hawass was intentionally trying to mislead people by making it seem that the top of his head was at the point here where you showed. Anybody and their mother can easily see that King Tut is looking downwards because of the direction where his eyes is going. Anybody could see that. A layman like me can see that, and a scientist who's gonna read his book will see that also. So who do you think he was trying to present that idea to? Matter of fact, if anybody was trying to present the idea that you're talking about, it would be the Egyptians themselves. So what is the truth? Was Hawass trying to make the back of King Tut's head as the top, as the King's Monologue was saying? Of course not. Or else Hawass would have followed it up by making the reconstructions similar to it. Why would you push an idea but not follow through with it? That makes no sense. Furthermore, King Tut's head is tilted in this image. No different than the image that the King's Monologue used to get a cephalic index of King Tut for 73. Make that make sense. What the King's Monologue does not know is that Hawass used to call King Tut and Akhenaten dolicephalic before the 2010 screenings, recent screenings. That's right. Before the 2010 screening, Hawass called Tutankhamen and Akhenaten's skull dolicephalic, and that was based off of their studies at that point in time. So if Hawass originally called King Tut dolicephalic, why did he change and say he was brachycephalic? If we read Scanning the Pharaohs on page 124, 125, and 126, there's a disease called Marfan syndrome. And it's discussed that King Tut and Akhenaten probably had this disease because they had features that hinted toward them possibly having this disease. Some of these features was dolicephalic, long face, wide pelvis, and long extremities, among other things. This is the reason why this test was done again, to check and see if King Tut and Akhenaten was actually dolicephalic, and the results showed that they were not. But are those results accurate? That's the question you should be asking yourself. But we will find out later if those results were accurate. How did Hawass measure the skulls of the Egyptians, the pharaohs? In the paper, it clearly states that the cephalic indices of the mummy heads were determined according to the method of Weber et al. So there's a reference point there. So we could go there and see how it was done. Okay, so let's read about the methods here. It says we use osteometric points for measurements of the skulls and skull bases. The landmarks used as measuring points have to be clearly visible. The landmarks have to be clearly visible. You took a whole bunch of pictures, put them together, took one image here, took one image there, and tried to create something. You even have a picture of King Tut with his skull cap on, and try to make measurements with that. But the one image that you do have, that you don't have to combine with anything else, you're trying to say that the image wasn't taken from the top, because that image actually comes out to 83%, which is brachycephalic. So out of all the images you have, the one that you don't have to combine, the one that's straightforward, that's right there, is basically saying King Tut is brachycephalic. In the same year that Hawass came out saying King Tut and Akhenaten was brachycephalic, 2010, another Egyptologist did a study on the same skull, KV55, of Akhenaten. However, unlike Hawass, he felt that the skull being called Akhenaten was not Akhenaten, but someone else. However, his craniometric results was similar. He had a cephalic index of 80.1. Remember, Hawass said that Akhenaten was 81. He had a cephalic index of 81. Eugene says his cephalic index was 80.1, which is brachycranic still. Here, Eugene points out another cranial study done by another Egyptologist in 1966 that stated that the cephalic index of KV55 or Akhenaten is 81. So that's 3 separate scientists basically stating that Akhenaten is 81. So your whole theory of Hawass trying to change the shape of the skull goes out the window, because you have at least 3 other independent studies saying that his skull is brachycranic. So let's reinforce this with another paper. In this paper it says the 1968 re-examination of Tutankhamun's mummy confirmed some hypotheses regarding Tutankhamun by comparing the X-ray images of Tutankhamun's mummy with those of the KV55 mummy identified by Harrison as Smeknir. Remember, as I said before, Eugene Stroud did not think KV55 was Akhenaten. He thought it was somebody else. Same thing with this scientist Harrison. Continue to read. It says, it was found that the skull of the 2 mummies were almost identical and that they had the same short and broad type brachycephalic. But Tutankhamun had a slightly narrower face than Smeknir, whatever it is. So the whole point is that, again, the concept of King Tut and Akhenaten being brachycephalic is nothing new. There was plenty of other measurements done on the skull. Hawass wasn't the only one that done measurements on the skull. Your whole theory goes out the window. Here we can see, again, Harris in 1972, measurements of Tutankhamun skull and Akhenaten brachycephalic. So here we have a paper from 1912. Let's see what this paper says about Akhenaten in the year 1912. Okay, so this book is from Elliot Smith, written in 1912. And this is one of the first measurements of Akhenaten's skull, one of them. Now, it reads, the cranium is broad and relatively flattened. Its measurements being 189 milliliters in length and 154 milliliters in breadth. So I'm not going to do this for you, but I'm going to basically tell you to figure this one out on your own. Divide the breadth, which is the width, 154, divided by the length, which is 189, and times it by 100, and you'll get the cephalic index. Tell me what you get. Okay, so I want to read this paper of a study done on the cephalic indexes of a couple West Africans. And it says the measurements were made using the measuring software of the 16-slice CT machine at the study center. The measurements were made independently by 3 persons, a radiologist and 2 radiographers, a chief radiographer. You are here using Adobe Illustrator to make measurements, while we have scientists having to have multiple scientists, radiographers, to make a conclusion about the cephalic index of a skull. And you're making it seem like anybody could just go home and sit down and do it. And the one image that is probably the easiest to use, which shows a cephalic index of 83%, you're trying to make an excuse that it's not shown from the top down. Utter complete nonsense. utter complete nonsense. I have clearly shown through the multiple examples that you made multiple mistakes and you are a novice at what you're doing. And you should leave it alone. Everything so far shows, including what you have done, that King Tut and Akhenaten is cephalic. Hey, do me a favor. We have two images of Akhenaten's skull from two different time periods, both from the top. And even in one of them, you can see the forehead. Do me a favor. Take some measurements on it. Get the cephalic index. Let's see what it says. So let's review. So you gave a made-up idea that Hawass was trying to put the idea that the back of King Tut's head was actually the top. Yet contradictory to that, he sanctioned images that contradicted that idea. Does that make sense? Think about it. Does it really make sense? He has an idea, but then he sanctions images that contradict his idea? That makes zero sense. So your idea makes zero sense. You stated that the image I posted wasn't a top-down view, yet it actually was because the forehead could be seen according to your own standards. You calculated the image that was taken from the back of King Tut's head according to you, and it was at 83%. Yet you felt in order for Hawass to get 83%, he would have to fully tilt King Tut's head to where he's looking downward at about a 90-degree angle, when he could have easily just gotten a cephalic index of 83% from the method you did previously. Make that make sense. You use multiple images and place reference points of measurements at contradictory points, while at the same time using images that don't say they were taken for cephalometric calculations. Matter of fact, none of the images I used or you use can be said is the determinant factor scientists use for calculating the cephalic index. A lot of what you did was assumption. Independent studies outside of Hawass and scientists who felt the skull was not Akhenaten in 2010 came to the same brachycranic number as Hawass and King Tut and Akhenaten in 1966. In cephalic index calculation, it is clearly obvious that it isn't something a random individual can do without actually having the actual CT images that is used for calculation along with the proper understanding of where to measure from. Something that a person with Adobe Illustrator should not consider himself a specialist in. You now have two different top-down images of Akhenaten. Feel free to measure both of them and see if we get a non-brachycephalic result, because this is King Tut's father. So if King Tut's father's numbers come out brachycranic, then the possibility is that the calculations on King Tut are also brachycranic.